Hey, let's continue on understanding about AWS IAM policies and roles and very detail in this lecture. Okay, so what is an IAM policy? Think of a policy like a permission slip. It's a set of rules that decides what you are allowed to do in AWS. For example, a user might be like an employee in an office, but the policy is the rule book that says this person can enter the meeting room but not the finance room. In AWS, policies are written in JSON, but don't worry, it's a structured way of saying what kind of actions are allowed or denied on which resources. So, in short, users and roles are identities, but policies are the actual permissions attached to them. Without policies, users can't do anything in AWS. Okay, let's understand about AWS IAM policy syntax, how it looks like. The structure of this policy is a JSON and it contains these elements: version, which policy language version is being used, a statement, the actual rules, it can be multiple, effect, which is allow or deny, action, which API actions are allowed or denied, resource, which AWS resource it applies to. Let's take a typical example of policy structure, which basically allows read access to an S3 bucket. You can see in this document, which contains a version, a statement, which is again a list of elements. That means the statement can be a multiple elements, and you're passing these parameters like effect, whether you're allowing it or denying it, and the action. So, what kind of action you're performing on this policy? You're basically saying that you're trying to retrieve an object from an S3 on a resource called my demo bucket. That's what this policy is for. While working with policies, you need to follow certain best practices. There are few practices like granting least privileges, only what is required. You need to grant those privilege. Use customer managed policies for flexibility. That means you create your own policies instead of using AWS managed policies. Okay, and avoid attaching policies directly to users. Use groups or roles. So that way you can basically use the same kind of policy to multiple number of users. Okay, now let's understand about what is an IAM role. So an IAM role is like a temporary identity in AWS. That means you will not be having a permanent credentials like access keys or secret access keys. You can use or create a IAM role which gives a kind of temporary access to access certain resources. So always remember, a role is used for communicating between multiple services. Let's say one service want to communicate with another service like an EC2 wants to talk to an S3 bucket, then there must be a role which is involved and needs to be created. Why actually the roles are required? Because in order to have a secure access without storing permanent credentials, we need a role. This is best for applications, EC2 instances, Lambda functions, or an external user who needs temporary access onto our AWS account. Okay, here are some common scenarios where we can use our roles. Okay, so as I told you earlier, EC2 instance role, that means an app running on EC2 needs to write or read data from an S3 bucket that requires an role. So that means there is an interaction between two services here, EC2 and S3. Then instead of hard coding the keys on EC2 instance, you attach an EC2 instance role. Okay, that basically gives an access to talk to an S3 bucket based on the policy that you are attaching to. Okay, and there is a cross account access that can also be possible using a role. Let's say for example a developer from account A needs to audit resources in account B. So instead of creating a user in both the accounts, so the dev assumes a role in account B. That means the other person who basically doesn't have an access into that different account, he will be getting an access based on cross account access role. Okay, and AWS service role, this is a example related to Lambda function, needs to write logs to CloudWatch. So that means whenever a Lambda function is trying to write some logs into the CloudWatch, it requires a service role or a service linked role. This is another type of role. Okay, how role works behind the scenes? They communicate with a service called STS, which is Security Token Service, which issues temporary credentials. Role permissions decides what actions are allowed. But you can see that this trust policy means EC2 instances can assume this role. You'd then attach permissions related to an S3 or whatever the service you're targeting it for. There are some best practices you need to follow while creating a role. Always prefer roles over access keys for apps and services. Use least privilege policies with roles. And AWS handles rotation of those temporary credentials automatically because it behind the scenes it talks to a service called STS security token service that issues temporary credentials. So you don't need to worry about storing your credentials for the long run. By now, you got a clear understanding about IAM rules and policies. So, this brings us to the end of the session. If you feel this is useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.